We've done it. We have an episode. I can't believe it. I'm as shocked as anybody else. It's been exactly 1 month to the day, as it turns out, since we've had an episode of this podcast for reasons that were out of my control for once, and out of your control as well. And I'll give you the quick rundown. I was sick for like 2 weeks right after the American Thanksgiving holiday. And then Stu, you were sick last week. And then Tuesday, when we were all set and ready to go, my power went out for 2.5 days, and we're back. But it's all right. We have the final episode of the 2023 season to go over right now. We're going to do the standard procedure, going over the news. We're going to go over some of your questions, and then we're going to end off the episode with a bit of a 2023 season in review that you probably want to stick around for. We want to try to get some of you guys involved in that as well. Course over to my right, Stu from Off in the Esses. How are you doing tonight?
You know, it's been good. Like you said, it's been so long since we've spoken, and there's been so much that has gone on in the sports car racing world. I think 2 weeks ago when we were we were initially supposed to do it 2 weeks ago. That was the first.
Yep.
That's when I was sick. Yep. And at that point, we were talking about how much stuff there was to talk about, and then every week it's just kind of compounded over top of each other. So there's a lot to talk about tonight. But I'm glad that we're all in good health again, and everybody has electricity.
Oh yeah, I'm very glad about that. So to kind of keep it a little bit brief, because this probably would have been a 3-hour episode if we did the standard roll call of talking about as much news as we could. Some of it is abbreviated, and obviously some of the news is a bit outdated at this point, so we're not going to cover some of the smaller driver announcements, but there are some of the big stories that I wanted to touch on, most notably right after we had our last episode. The 2024 WEC entry list came out, and I'm not going to hide my secrets at all. I'm going to read down the Wikipedia article of the 2024 entries, just because there were a couple more drivers that were confirmed since the original entry list came out, and it's probably just going to be easier if I go down this way, and we can just discuss who's on the grid for next season. Obviously, we have 37 cars on the grid for next season. We talked about that in a previous episode. Starting things off in the hyper category, we're seeing the return of the number 2 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac, the factory Cadillac entry. Still running one car. We've already discussed that a couple times in episodes prior. Sticking around for another season, which is great to see. Still don't have that second car, which would be great to see in the future, but I'll take a factory Cadillac on the grid any day of the week. Also hanging around, of course, we have both of the Penske Porsches, the number 5 and the number 6 car. A bit of a driver shuffle going around there. Matt Campbell coming over from IMSA, now going to be racing in the number 5 car in the WEC next season. For Toyota, a livery change is actually one of the things that happened during our little 1 month break. They will be sporting
pretty nice looking change too.
Yeah, it's simple. It's simple, and I think it's going to turn some heads. Some people might call it a bit lazy. I think that it's a nice change. They've been sporting the typical red and white with a couple different variations since the 2016 season. And as much as I would have loved for them to bring back the TS030 blue, we're getting an all-carbon black car next year. I don't know if it's going to be painted black or if it's actually going to be just bare carbon. It would be really, really cool if we get a bare carbon hypercar on the grid. In fact, I think if I remember correctly, the last time we got that might have been 2011 with the number 1 Audi. I believe that was sporting a completely bare carbon livery, years before anybody in F1 picked up the trend.
Yeah.
Typical standard procedure for Toyota next year, sporting the 7 and 8 cars. The notable driver change for that crew is Nick DeVries joining the 7 car. We already talked about that. I believe that was in the last episode, replacing Jose Maria Lopez. One of the new hypercars we have on the grid next season is that of Hisata Fraschini with their Tipo 6 hypercar. The 2 drivers confirmed right now for that number 11 car are Alex Garcia and Jean-Carl Vernet. I don't believe we have any concrete speculation on who might be the third driver. I do know that Marco Bononomi has been testing that car in the past. He, of course, drove for Audi with the R18 last in 2015 at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. So I'm wondering if we might see him in that car, but that's kind of a wait and see thing on that front. Hertz Team Joda, we have 2 cars for next season. We have the 38 rolling over from this season and the new number 12 car. Bit of an homage to Tom Brady, so it is, who is a primary investor in that team. The interesting thing about Joda is that their driver lineup is almost completely overhauled. The only driver that we're seeing remain on that team who is there this season is Will Stevens, switching from the 38 car to the number 12 car next year. Joining him in the number 12 is Callum Ilott and Norman Nato. And in the 38 car, we have the likes of Jenson Button racing full-time for the first time since the 2018-2019 season when he raced with SMP Racing, racing that 38 car. Great to have an F1 world champion racing full-time in the WEC and boosting my motto that it's a feeder series. We have Phil Hansen stepping up from the United Autosport LMP2 ranks, joined alongside Oliver Rasmussen. For BMW, that's right, we have 2 full-time BMWs in the WEC next year. We have the number 15 and the number 20 cars entered by Team WRT. Dries Vanthoor and Sheldon Vanderlinde are the 2 confirmed drivers for that team at the moment. We have the full driver lineup for Alpine in the number 35 and 36 cars. We're going to have Paul-Loup Chatin, Ferdinand Habsburg, and Mathieu Vaxivière in the 35 car. And in the 36 car, Nicolas Lapierre, Charles Malaysi, and Mick Schumacher, also coming from that feeder series. Ferrari is a bit of an interesting one. We have, of course, the 50 and the 51 lineups returning from this season. But we also have the addition of a not factory, but run by the same team that runs the factory team, privateer entry, number 83 Ferrari, headlined by Robert Kubica. We're also going to see Yiffy Yi in that car, and I believe Robert Schwartzman is a bit of a shoo-in as the 3rd driver for that car. So 3 not fully factory, but kind of pseudo-factory Ferraris on the grid for next season. Of course, the hypercar teams are only allowed to run 2 proper factory cars for the full season, but they, of course, are running that 3rd privateer Ferrari. I guess it's probably not going to get as much factory money as the proper factory programs. But apart from that, that team should look relatively similar, I think. For Lamborghini, the solo Lamborghini that will be running full-time next year, the number 63, we're going to see Mirko Bortolotti, Daniel Kvyat, and Eduardo Mortara racing that car with Iron Lynx supported by Prema. In the Peugeot 968, or not 968, 9X8, we have the return of the number 93 and number 94 car next year. Finally, Proton Competition also continuing with their Porsche 963 and the number 99 car for next season, which I believe brings the car count for Porsches on the grid up to 5 full-time Porsches on the WEC grid next season. So quite a heavy showing from Porsche, but I think also in the time that we were away, they announced that they are going to be pausing any additional new customer teams for that car for the 2024 season at least. Don't know how far that's going to extend, but gives the other manufacturers a bit of a chance to catch up. In the GT3 ranks, we've been speculating in the past what manufacturers we might see in the LMGT3 class, but we finally have a definitive answer to that. First up, we have Heart of Racing with the new Aston Martin GT3 Evo. Ian James is headlining that entry on the driver front in the number 27 car. We have Team WRT entering 2 BMW M4 GT3s, the number 31 and number 46. Most notable news story out of that one is that Valentino Rossi will be racing full-time next year in the WEC, which of course includes the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And I'm sure Valentino Rossi is going to bring plenty of fans to that race. It actually sold out, the 24 Hours sold out within 2 days of the tickets going on sale to the general public this year, which beat last year's record by a landslide. So certainly seeing a massive interest in that race continuing from this season. We have AF Corsa sporting 2 cars in the GT3 ranks as well, so that's 5 cars total across both classes, with the 296 GT3, the number 54 and number 55. United Autosport, that was one of the teams that was a little bit up in the air, but I at least thought was going to be a shoo-in based on their previous running in the WEC. They will be running 2 McLaren 720S GT3 Evos, the number 59 and number 95 cars. Iron Lynx will be also racing in both classes next season. They, of course, have that prototype, and they'll also be racing in the GT3 class with the number 60 and the number 85 Iron Dames entry, which the Iron Dames entry is now confirmed again to be running next season, which is fantastic. Proton competition. Also, want to keep talking about teams that are running in both classes. They will be running 2 Mustang GT3s, that brand new Ford Mustang that will be running in both IMSA and the WEC, the 77 and the 88. We have a Codis ASP, which will be running the 2 Lexus GT3s next year, the 78 and 87. That is where Jose Maria Lopez ended up after his drive from Toyota ended at the end of this season. TF Sport, they will be running 2 Corvette Z06 GT3Rs. Got to get used to that new name. The number 81 and 82 for the full season. We also have 2 Manthey Porsche 911 GT3Rs, the number 91 and number 92. Finally, last one, we have the 777 D Station Racing Aston Martin, which will be joining Heart of Racing as the second Aston Martin in that class for the full season. There's a lot of cars, and I think I covered it in like 10 minutes, which is not too bad, I don't think. Stu, I want to get some of your thoughts on the 2024 WEC lineup so I can give myself a little bit of a chance to breathe.
Yeah, it's definitely a full one. Like we said in the LMGT3 class, not really too many surprises here. That in terms of manufacturers, we kind of knew that Audi was going to be left out at the end of the day. Same with Mercedes. Just given, when you look at the manufacturers that got in, it all makes sense. I'm really interested to see how a Codis ASP is going to take to the new Lexus. Well, not the new, but new to them Lexus RCF GT3. Of course, that car has been pretty heavily used in IMSA, as well as I believe it's been used in its GT3 spec in Japan a fair bit as well. And I also think that it was run in some European championships, kind of off and on, but definitely not a GT3 car that you see on very many grids. So it's going to be nice to see that car and see what they can unleash with that in the new LMGT3 class. On the hypercar side of things, of course, a notable omission from the entry list was Van Wall. Of course, participating this year, announcing that they're going to be switching to, is it the Pipo motor, I believe? Is that what the Glickenhaus used?
That is what the Glickenhaus used. I don't believe that, as far as I know, that is something that I saw they wanted to switch the engine, but I didn't catch what they wanted to change to. Maybe somebody in the chat can fill me in, but I don't believe it was the engine from the Glickenhaus. Because currently they're running the Gibson, a tuned up Gibson V8 from what we see in the P2 car.
Yep.
That they had also run in the LMP1 class with their previous car.
Okay, I could have been getting the news mixed up there, but regardless, we're not going to see them on the grid. But of course, so many notable additions to the WEC grid here. We have you have WRT that's going to be running the new BMW, the M Hybrid. You have Alpine that's joining the grid, a third Ferrari, an additional Porsche with Jota. You have the Lamborghini, of course, the Soda Fraschini, like. There are so many new entries that are going to be on the grid. It is like, just a whole new wave of excitement. I feel like last year was obviously a really exciting time with the addition of so many of these new cars. And then next season with the new manufacturers and the additional cars that are going to be coming to the grid, it kind of brings a nice more excitement. I don't even know how to describe it. Just more excitement coming to the grid. And you touched on it, a bunch of the very strong driver combinations that are going to be present throughout the grid. There's a lot to look forward to, I think, with this entry list that was announced.
Oh, definitely. And actually, one of the stories that I completely forgot to mention as I was going over the hypercar class is that Asada Fraschini was actually supposed to be run. The program was supposed to be run by Vector Sport,
Yep.
who was in the LMP2 class this season. Now, at the last minute, right like hours before the entry list came out, it was revealed that Vector Sport was no longer involved with that program. I believe they're looking at potentially fielding a car in the ELMS next season instead. Um, but not too sure what really happened behind the scenes there. It just seemed like there was general miscommunication between the manufacturer and the team running the program. But you got to wonder if that's already happening before the car really, or the program really gets off the ground and on track, what that's going to spell out for that program in general. But we'll have to see at the opening races of next season where they really get off where they actually start. And what foot they start the season on. But definitely one of the interesting stories that I thought came out of that whole entry list release. So, I do want to move on since we have a lot to discuss, but there is your 2024 WEC entry list for next season. Very excited about that and looking forward to going over the 2024 season starting at Qatar in early March. Now, the other thing that came out of WEC news while we were away is that the Le Mans safety car rules will be revised for next season. Now, this is something I was a bit opinionated on because while I initially thought that the safety car rules that they introduced for this season would make the race a little bit closer and a little bit more exciting, I was a bit fearful from the start that the safety car periods would just be too long. And I think that concern was validated during the race this year. The first safety car period that started on the opening lap with the number 311 Action Express Cadillac, I believe that lasted 45-ish minutes. We had another safety car after that was like an hour and a half long. That one was partially down to track being pretty wet as well. So you can't blame the safety car procedure entirely for that one. But I think the general conclusion I came to pretty early on in the race this year is that you can't really have safety car periods that are consistently going to be 45 plus minutes long. I think that it's too much of a turn off for a lot of the more casual fans who might just be tuning in to watch on TV. We had a lot of American fans watching the race this year, North American fans in general who wanted to watch for the NASCAR Garage 56 entry. And I'm sure they were probably a little bit confused by the 45-minute long safety car periods that they had early on in the race. So I think that it's nice to be able to shorten that a little bit, but I do want to discuss the modification that's being made to that procedure for next year. In essence, same procedure we saw this year, except that the drop back rule that was introduced for this season is going to be going away. Now, the drop back rule, what it was is that the two AM classes that we had and we'll have at the 24 hours next year, LMP2 and LMGT3 now, would move over to the side of the track and drop back behind their class leaders. So essentially what would happen, you have a safety car period get started. The typical 3 safety cars would go around the track to give gaps, and that was just so that you didn't have cars driving 8.5 miles to catch up to the safety car queue. They would actually be able to get crews out on track and working earlier. So they had the typical 3 safety cars at the start. At the end of the safety car period, the classes would merge together. So they would all merge behind one safety car, and then I have to read up on this. It was just telling you how confusing the procedure was. At the end of the incident, the 2 other safety cars would leave the track and they would all group behind that one safety car. And then all cars with the class leader behind them would pass around. So it was sort of a wave around the track so they could catch up behind the class leader. And then after that, they would drop back and separate all of the classes into their own order. So essentially, what we're doing there is we're just dropping that drop back, and I believe that should reduce the safety car time next year by at least 1 lap, and any lap less around the safety car at Le Mans, which being an 8.5 mile track is, I think, a good improvement. But I'm a bit curious to see how much shorter that's actually going to make the safety car periods for next season. At the bare minimum, it's a little bit less confusing to read up on. I think the racing's still going to be relatively close, and I do actually think that it's nice to still have cars separated by class. I think that it got a little bit too artificial this year with all the cars being separated into their own class. Basically, just putting second place right behind the leader, whereas now you might have a little bit of a buffer between traffic, so that the leader still has a little bit of an advantage that they had before the safety car came out. Stu, I don't know how opinionated you are about the Le Mans safety car procedure, but do you have any takeaways from this?
Look, for me, I'm used to watching a lot of IMSA. So the full course yellow safety car procedures there are certainly not the most straightforward things in the world, and definitely don't take a while, or they definitely aren't short. So watching Le Mans last year and seeing how everything played out, I definitely understand where the points of frustration there. I think anything that you can do to try and reduce the amount of time in those safety car periods is a good step, is a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I am going to be interested to see, just again, how I understand the regulations here is during when the when the safety cars B and C and leave the track and the cars group up behind safety car A, I wonder how much of an advantage some of those cars farther back are going to have in terms of tire temps. Being able to come around the track at even if it's only a half lap of Le Mans, if that's all that it takes for them to catch up, that's still 4 miles of running where they can get heat in the tires. And that could definitely give you a nice little jump off the start. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how little things like that end up playing out. But I think at the end of the day, even if you're just saving 1 lap of running around a safety car with this procedure, you're saving how many of our minutes multiplied by how many of our safety cars. Like, this could lead to a considerably more running under green flag conditions, which is what we ultimately want to see.
Right. And now I don't know how much of an advantage you would actually gain at a track
Yeah.
like Le Mans, because most of the corners are not very high speed except for the Porsche curves where you might generate a lot of tire temp there. But by that point, you would probably be caught up. But it does bring up an interesting point, because nice segue here. The other bit of news that came out is that there will be no tire warmers at Le Mans next year. Now, this season, after Spa was a bit of a mess, they made a very late exception to allow tire warmers for just the 24 hours of Le Mans this year, in all 3 classes. And it looks like we're not going to have a return of that next year unless we have an equally large disaster at a race like Spa next year, possibly. But I wouldn't hold out hope for that. The decision was under review at the end of November. There were rumors that we might get a return of that procedure, or of that exception for Le Mans next year. But in the end, they just decided to not pass that decision and leave Le Mans like the rest of the season. Now, I will be interested to see what that looks like, especially at night. I just mentioned that Le Mans is a track that's difficult to get tire temp at. I think you could liken it to Daytona in IMSA, where the track gets pretty cool at night. And Daytona is also a pretty high-speed track with a lot of straightaway running, where you're not going to generate tire temp as quick as you would at maybe a shorter circuit like Lime Rock. So interested to see what that looks like next season. Going to see a lot of cars creeping out of the pit lane, especially at nighttime. But we'll have to see how that decision fares. So we do have some IMSA news. We got quite a bit of IMSA news to go over in the month that we were gone, which is a bit unsurprising, and I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Alrighty. So, of course, we've talked quite a bit about the IMSA entry list and many of the drivers and teams that were confirmed for that in previous episodes. But a significant team program announcement here over the last few weeks has been from the Lamborghini stable, and specifically for the SC63. So Lamborghini, they had unveiled the first few drivers earlier in 2023 that we're going to be running in the IMSA as well as the WEC. But we now know the confirmed drivers for the 4 Michelin Endurance Cup races that Lamborghini is going to be running in. Of course, they'll miss the Rolex 24. So the 3 drivers that have been confirmed are Matteo Cairoli, Andrea Caldarelli, and Romain Grosjean. So a pretty strong combination here. I don't think Cairoli's done too much running in IMSA. That I'm aware of. But Andrea Caldarelli has done quite a bit of running here. He's been in the Lamborghini family for a long time. Romain Grosjean, one of the newer additions, of course, well known for his time in Formula One, as well as, of course, currently in IndyCar. An interesting note for Grosjean is he's not going to be available for the Sail in 6 Hours of the Glen. Well, I think it's safe to assume that he's not going to be available. There is an IndyCar conflict that weekend. But luckily for them, it is a 6-hour event and they do not need a third driver for that car. So I think we can probably expect that they'll just be running with Cairoli and Caldarelli there. But, Lamborghini, this is a strong driver combination here. Lots of experience, not just in sports car racing, but just in various forms of racing around the world. And just a really strong driver lineup here. And that car, they unveiled the actual race livery as well recently at the Daytona test at the beginning of December. And car looks good. And the driver lineup looks good. It's a shame that we're going to miss them for the Rolex, but I think when you see them hit the track, it's and get all the bugs, the last of the gremlins worked out with the car. I think we can expect them to be a pretty strong combination as the season goes on.
Yeah, car looks good. Car sounds good. Car's been testing. They, of course, ran in the IMSA test at Daytona. They also had their own test at COTA last week, I believe. Might have been 2 weeks ago now.
Yep.
So they're getting the miles with that car. They were actually, I believe they were the fastest car at the IMSA test
They were
a couple of weeks ago. So certainly throwing punches right out of the gate. But I'll be excited to see what that car looks like at. I'm sorry, I won't see that car at Daytona. I'll be excited to see what that car looks like at Qatar and the WEC and Sebring for IMSA when it finally gets on track in March. Gotta keep reminding myself it won't be at Daytona. What a shame.
Yep.
Maybe
it'll be there, but just not running.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe we'll see a little show car there. At least get some excitement out of that. We got a question from Wild Stallion. Is the Lamborghini SC63 based on the Lamborghini Revuelto? I hope that's how that's pronounced. Probably not. It's a Spanish pronunciation. No. Short answer, that's a road car that they had built. This is a purpose-built LMDH race car based on the Ligier LMP2 chassis and powered by a twin-turbo V8. So no, there might be a little crossover in parts, but as far as I can tell, that's it.
I'm pretty sure the headlights are based on the Lamborghini Cyan. I'm probably not pronouncing that right.
I don't know my Lamborghini models.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of the model either, but I believe that there's some design cues taken from that car.
Okay. We also got a bit of a news story or a confirmation of something that was brought up on the IMSA production front. Do you want to talk about that one a little bit as well?
Yeah, so you'll recall at the end of the of Petit Le Mans, there was a pretty big question mark over, would we see IMSA Radio and IMSA TV? Would we see that continue into 2024? Their contract was kind of in limbo. And Hindy at the end of the Petit Le Mans broadcast had a pretty he had a speech that very much sounded like this could be the end. So there was a lot of questions that were there, but it was recently confirmed that both IMSA Radio and IMSA TV would return for 2024. It's expected to be the same crew, broadcasters, pit reporters that we've come to know in recent years. But there are some interesting caveats that could unwind here in the future with this. So obviously IMSA is very closely tied to NASCAR. And if you're not following what's going on in the world of NASCAR right now, they just finalized their next big TV agreement. It includes some streaming, some streaming in there as well as their traditional cable packages. NBC is still involved. But with some of these changes, NASCAR has also put a lot of work into building a new NASCAR productions facility, which that's where the IMSA TV broadcasts are produced. I believe that the feed from NASCAR Productions may also be used by NBC. I'm not 100% certain on that.
Yep, correct.
Okay, so a new NASCAR Productions facility is really big news in the world of IMSA, because it's probably going to be used for those broadcasts. So how that could affect future broadcasts, we don't really know. I do understand, based on, I think, Hindy mentioned on Radio Le Mans that they're expected to be at more races next year than they were this year. I think a couple of the races this past season they did remote. So they're expecting to be at the track more. Hopefully this is just a more great news, that this new NASCAR Productions facility is going to lead to, improved broadcast, better broadcast quality. Maybe, whatever that means for us, hopefully it's all good things, but it'll be interesting to see how IMSA is able to utilize some of the new NASCAR Productions facility. But overall, really, really good news to hear that IMSA Radio and the IMSA TV crew going to be around for 2024, and we're going to be listening. Well, some of us are going to be listening to their broadcasts or watching their broadcasts.
The at track staple.
Yep.
Yeah. Also on radio at the track, like I said. I want to provide a little bit of context on what was going on, what discussions were being had around Petit Le Mans this year, because I do think that hasn't really been publicly made note of, and I don't want to share all the details, so I'll try to steer my way around this pretty swiftly. But around Petit Le Mans weekend, before the race had started, I had heard from some pretty high-level motorsports media sources, including a pretty prominent commentator in the sports car racing scene, that IMSA was having discussions, at least, to have a pretty big shakeup in the commentary crew and the production for their broadcast for next season. The way it was worded to me then made it sound like this was almost a done deal, which is why I was a little bit surprised by this announcement. But it sounds like at the end of Petit Le Mans, there was still a little bit of uncertainty, maybe just some contract negotiation that was going on behind the scenes with Radio Le Mans. Because, of course, the one thing I do want to point out is that the current IMSA Radio, as we know it, is a production of Radio Show Limited, which was formerly known as Radio Le Mans. So it now seems like that's what was going on behind the scenes, whereas at the time I had thought that this was a done deal and that there would be a shakeup during the off season. But like you said, I think it's really great to have that lineup return for next season. They've become a crowd favorite. They've become a staple of North American sports car racing, dating back even into the ALMS days, when John Heintal was a lead commentator on the ESPN broadcast. So for him to be continuing on in IMSA Radio is fantastic, and I'm looking forward to hearing their crew at Daytona. So, another piece of news that we got very recently, we're getting into more recent news now, was that Dragon Speed.
We're catching up.
We're catching up. We're slowly catching up. Dragon Speed will be returning to the LMP2 grid for the Rolex 24 in a little over a month's time now. We're getting pretty close to the Rolex 24. This was a bit of a surprise announcement, but they will be replacing the second MDK Motorsports Porsche in the Rolex 24. Eric Lux and James Allen. Of course, James Allen won the race in that photo finish in LMP2 this year, are the first two drivers to be confirmed for that entry. And that will be replacing, like I said, the number 53 MDK Motorsports Porsche, who was on the initial Rolex 24 entry list but did not have any drivers named to it. I think it's great to see Dragon Speed back in the Rolex 24. They were an extremely strong team in the Rolex 24. I believe they won 3 out of the last 4 races ending in 2022, or 3 of the last 4 Rolex 24s, I should say. Yep. So really great to see them back on the grid, and I certainly already would say you have to look at them as a team who's going to be a potential front runner for that event.
Yeah, it's disappointing to see that MTK was that they had to pull out their entry, but replacing them, Dragon Speed, obviously quite a bit of history in IMSA as well as in the Rolex 24 itself. The only question that really remains there is, who are the other 2 drivers going to be, and if I'd love to fingers crossed that we might see Juan Pablo Montoya and his son Sebastian have some time in their schedule. It's probably largely going to be dependent on Seb's formula schedule, but hopefully we'll be able to see them racing together once again. They of course have quite the history with Dragon Speed in recent years. I believe that both of them may have actually been they might be on the ELMS waitlist. I know that Juan is for sure with Dragon Speed on the ELMS waitlist, so it would be great to see Juan and Sebastian on the grid in that car. But regardless, great to see Dragon Speed back on the grid. I think that's a local team as well. I think they might be local to Florida.
Yeah, I believe Elton Julian is Florida-based, but I don't know exactly where. What part of the state.
And not just LMP2 news here. We can bump up to a little bit of GTP news, and this is one that's might take a second to wrap your head around. Or if you saw the news last week, Proton Competition have announced their new partnership with Mustang Sampling that will start with the 2024 IMSA season. Mustang Sampling, of course, has been in the world of IMSA in one form or another with one team or another for, man, it feels like forever. Of course, they've they took last season off with the first year of the GTP class returning, but this partnership between Proton and Mustang Sampling is going to reunite Mustang Sampling and the number 5 car. The number 5 is coming to Proton along with Mustang Sampling. You're going to see the iconic gold and black colors of Mustang Sampling on the Porsche 963. It looks incredible. If you haven't seen images of the car, the renders of the car yet, the car looks incredible. I'm super excited to see how that car is going to look under the lights at the Rolex. I think it's just going to look even better. But really interesting that the number 5 is following them to Proton. Of course, Mustang Sampling, most recently, they were partnered with JDC Miller Motorsports during the from 2020 to 2022 in the DPI class, where they also ran the number 5 entry there. So the number 5 is going over to Proton Competition. JDC is they're staying. They're doing their own thing. They're going to be running the number 85, which is what they ran with their LMP3 car last season, and then Proton Competition in terms of their driver announcements. It's been confirmed that Jean-Marie Bruni and Neil Johnny will be in that entry, but we still don't know the other 2 drivers that are going to be there. So I know I think I saw a question about this in the chat as well. So will there only be one JDC Miller car with the sampling livery, or will there be 2 JDC cars, one yellow and the other with the Mustang sampling livery? The answer to that is there is going to be a yellow, the Banana Boat JDC livery, the number 85, that is going to stay. But the number 5 Mustang sampling is going to be run by Proton Competition, not associated with JDC Miller Motorsports in any way. Right. Did you have a chance to see that rendering?
Oh, of course. It's a fantastic livery. Yeah. Big fan of that car. It's going to be, I think, one of my favorites on track next year. The interesting thing that I had to do some quick research on because I couldn't remember, but Mustang sampling has been racing in IMSA and a prominent sponsor for IMSA prototype teams. I don't remember exactly when they started, but I know it was back with the Action Express Corvette DP days, way back at latest 2016. That number 5 has always stuck with Mustang sampling, not with the team that they've run for. So started out with Action Express. They were branded as Mustang Sampling Racing in 2017 when they ran with Action Express. And then they went over to sponsoring JDC for a long time. When they switched to JDC, I kept thinking that was an Action Express car, because not only was it a Mustang sampling car, but it was also a Cadillac, which is what Action Express was, of course, running as well. And then now they're making the switch over to Proton, and I'm going to keep thinking that that's a JDC car, although maybe not, because at least the livery's significantly different than it was this time around, than it was when they switched from Action Express to JDC. So yeah, that number 5 has been following Mustang sampling around through 3 teams now, and the addition of Proton running that car next year, I think it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to seeing that one, and like I said, big fan of the livery already, and can't wait to see it on track at Daytona.
Yeah, I think that one's going to be a one of the crowd favorites. Who doesn't love a good black and gold livery?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess this is the second gold Porsche we've seen now, with the first one being Jota over in the WEC. True. So I'm going to switch things over because I think that covered everything. We did that in pretty short time, just under 45 minutes.
Efficient.
Efficient. We covered, I think, all the big news stories that I wanted to go over. Of course, we omitted some of them, but in the interest of keeping this podcast a little bit compressed, I think that satisfies the news section for this week and for the 2023 season, believe it or not. I do want to go over some questions. So we're going to start with a question that we got before the show, and I do invite you to throw any questions that you may have in the chat, and we'll try to get to those before we wrap out the episode with our year in review. We got a question from at Toyota GR010 on X. Also, I saw in the chat earlier in this episode as well. It says, in May this year, there was a rumor of, I'm going to butcher this, Cyril Abitable, I think. Abitable?
It's close.
French?
Yeah,
French?
I think that's actually pretty close.
All right, thank you. Gathering staff for Hyundai's Le Mans Hypercar program, but no news since. A few days ago, he was promoted as the president of Hyundai Motorsports, a sign of things to come. So here's what I have to say about this. Hyundai has been sort of there as a manufacturer who's expressed interest in prototype racing for a while now. They were at the roundtable negotiations when the new formula was being discussed, or the new regulations were being discussed. They're a bit like McLaren, where every few months maybe we'll hear something pop up, but it doesn't usually get any further than that. I know that they have expressed interest in running a hydrogen-powered prototype in the past. The hydrogen class at Le Mans was recently postponed to the 2027 season. So if we do see them in a hydrogen-powered prototype, it wouldn't be for a little while. That would leave LMH, Le Mans Hypercar, and LMDH on the table if they want to run in a prototype before that. The interesting thing about Hyundai is that they seem to have a pretty heavy presence in, well, worldwide sports car racing, I would say, with the touring car scene, but especially in North America as well, in IMSA, running the, I guess, pseudo factory, or maybe, is it fully factory
It
backed?
is. I believe it is. Yeah.
Brian Herta Autosport TCR program in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. I'd argue in saying that they are probably the most invested manufacturer in the Pilot Challenge right now. But we haven't seen them race in higher level sports car racing ranks than that, which is a little bit interesting. Perhaps they just don't have a respective road car to bump up to the GT ranks, and that really just leaves a prototype for them. I would say that the news of Cyril's promotion to president of their motorsports division doesn't necessarily correlate to an uptick in potential for that prototype program to get off the ground. I think that Hyundai right now is probably pretty focused on their WRC program over in that scene. So I would say that, of course, they still remain a possibility for the future, but I don't know if his promotion necessarily increases that possibility. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a good step. It's a good step. Of course, Cyril brings with him a long history in racing. But we also know that Hyundai is also heavily invested in some of their other racing. I believe World Rally Championship they're pretty heavily invested in right now.
Yep.
And yeah, they're one of the manufacturers that's been on the fence kind of for the last few years. They're one of the ones that they're kicking around the idea, but are super non-committal, and maybe it'll just take some waiting out until if the hydrogen class actually ends up coming to fruition in 2027, where we'll see them sort of emerge and partake in the championship then. But yeah, like you said, they do have their TCR program. I know that they're pretty competitive wherever they run that program, sort of worldwide. They're very heavily invested, it looks like, in North America, not just in Michelin Pilot Challenge, but in some of the other championships. You see their footprint growing with that program. So I don't know. I'm not, like I really want Hyundai to come. I think that their addition to the championship, whether it be the WEC, IMSA, or both, would be very welcomed. And seeing kind of a newer manufacturer make that jump into this top level of sports car racing would be great. I don't really think I'm holding my breath for it to happen in the next couple of years, but I don't know. Hopefully it'll be wrong.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me is that if you do get the chance to go to an IMSA race and you walk around the fan zone, almost always at almost any race you go to, you'll see a big Hyundai tent set up there. They'll have road cars out. They'll be handing out free T-shirts. They'll be, having you spin a wheel to get a prize or whatever. So their presence in IMSA already is pretty massive as manufacturers go. In fact, I'd say one of the largest if you go into any of those fan villages. It's just interesting to me that their largest presence is in the second level class in the Michelin Pilot Challenge, which in itself is already the second level series in IMSA. So if that's the presence that they're already showing for a program like that, then it makes me wonder if they do have interest in bumping that car or bumping that brand up to the higher ranks. But like you said, and like I said earlier, it just seems like something that they've been on the fence for a while about, but just haven't made that full committed step yet. And of course, that would probably be something that has to come from uh, a decision that would have to come from Hyundai Global. So maybe that's where the roadblock is right now, where the North American division might be interested in doing something like that, but they don't really have the green light from the global corporate heads behind the finances. We got a message saying Hyundai could use their luxury brand Genesis and turn their G70 into a GT3, which
Yeah.
would look pretty stunning. Yeah, they definitely could do something like that. I see that as a lot less likely because Genesis doesn't have the same performance sort of heritage that a brand like Lexus has, where Lexus really tries to market the performance of their cars in recent years, especially. So I think that's why Lexus makes sense in a formula like that. And you could say the same for Acura as well, with the NSX being a full-blown supercar.
But
Genesis, we haven't really seen that same level, but maybe we saw something like that down the road. But I think Hyundai would be probably more likely.
I mean, kind of a counter argument to that is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg here? When you bring one of your flagship sort of vehicles, one of your higher end models into the racing environment, then, then at that point, it kind of becomes associated more with high performance as well. So I definitely agree with you. I definitely don't associate, the Genesis with sort of at the same level as your Lexus or many of the other sports car manufacturers that are on the grid. But yeah, it would be interesting to see them bring a GT3. But given all of their conversations have been around an LMH LMDH style car, I think it's probably a lot more likely that would be the direction that they will go in.
Right. All right. So I want to spend the rest of the episode doing a bit of a 2023 season year in review, because this has been a truly groundbreaking year in worldwide sports car racing. Both IMSA and the WEC have seen huge improvements this season, and I do want to just discuss some of that and talk about some of our favorite moments and highlights from this season. And I encourage anybody in the chat to get involved in this as well and let us know some of your favorites as we go along. I initially had wanted to do sort of like a thing where the community votes on these and we do an awards show type thing. And then the wonderful Tim Fulbrook over at Only Endurance turned out to do that exact same thing today, which I didn't know about. And I didn't come prepared with a suit, so I'm pretty glad we didn't try to steal his idea.
Oh, true.
But we'll go over some of our favorites, and like I said, I encourage you to join in, and we'll try to cover as many of those as we can. The first thing I want to ask you, Stu, many great races this year in the IMSA Championship and the WEC. I'm curious to know your favorite, though. If you had to pick one above the bunch.
So all of these questions I really, really struggled with. I'm not gonna lie. So, and a bit of backstory for it. I know that I was watching the Only Endurance, the award show that they did today. Great job by Tim, as always. A lot of fun watching that, and everything was voted on and nominated by the fans. But one of the things that I really felt when I was watching the show was there was a real underrepresentation of IMSA. I felt like in the award show, there was a lot of WEC. And I wanted to make sure that when I was answering these questions tonight, that I got a little bit of everything in there. So I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit because I have a few different criteria for some of these questions. So for favorite event from the 2023 season, from an attending in-person perspective, had a great time at the 6 Hours of the Glen. In the middle of the summer, although it was hot and there was downpours, an incredible event. Getting to see just any of the live crowds in person, getting to experience that excitement in person, you can't go wrong with it. I think that was a great event. I was fortunate enough to go to a few races or a few race weekends last year, and that one took the cake for me. The 6 hours of the Glen. But if I had to go to just races overall from the season, in IMSA, I'm going with Petit Le Mans. I thought it lived up to the hype. Would have loved to see that race come down to a real hard, race to the actual finish line and not end up with a car in the wall at the end of it. But I think, there was a lot of excitement at Petit Le Mans, but overall favorite event of the season, I think the 24 hours of Le Mans is takes cake for me. There was so much hype around the race, and it did live up to the hype. There was great racing across all of the classes. Of course, the hypercar battle was pretty intense and going right down to the wire there. So I think the 24 hours of Le Mans has to take the favorite event of 2023 for me. But what about you?
I got a couple scores to settle with you here first. All right, I gotta
Uh-oh.
make a couple points. First of all, you mentioned Watkins Glen, phenomenal race. I've been to that race twice, 2018 and 2021. Not just a phenomenal event, but I just love Watkins Glen as a location as well.
The town is
Middle
great too.
middle of the summer, town's great, right on a lake. If you have the chance to go out to Watkins Glen for any event, but I think especially the 6 hours, great race. Definitely try to make it out to that one. I have a lot of fun every single time I go to that race. The only thing that's a tough thing about it is, much like Sebring, it's very hard to find a hotel for that race. So if you do want to go, book early. The Petit Le Mans, if I'm not mistaken, you put it at the bottom of your tier list, and now you're saying it was one of your favorite IMSA events. So a little bit of a contrast there. And of course, you mentioned Le Mans. Obviously, I'll be able to talk about that in a little bit. There were many great races for me this year. One of the ones that stood out to me was the IMSA Grand Prix of Long Beach. I think that was the first real event that threw a lot of wild cards on the table. Obviously, Sebring had a bit of a chaotic final hour. But Long Beach, I think, was the true YouTube highlights last lap, or not really last lap because there's 2 laps to go, pass gone wrong that sort of set the stone for what we were expecting from the GTP class in the future. But it wasn't just that last lap, or not last lap, second to last lap moment that dictated the race. We also had a couple of cars go off in turn 1 on the first lap. We had Sebastian Bourdais spin around, just outbraking himself in turn 1 on the first lap. We had the 60 car make contact with one of the BMWs and go around. The number 6 Porsche, which qualified unfortunately pretty poorly, went from 6th to 2nd between the start of the race and the first restart. The number 10 car looked like it had the pace all day to just run away from the field, but they had an issue in their first pit stop. And fell a bit down the order. I think they fell to 5th or 6th. And from that point on, Ricky Taylor was just trying to play catch up. He was flying through the field, trying to set purple laps of that car and find his way back to the lead. Obviously, like I had already mentioned, just didn't really go his way at the very end. And I think that was a big integral moment for the championship. But at the end of the day, it was unexpected podiums and a race victory for the number 6 Porsche. It was the first return win for Porsche in the prototype category, and a second podium in a row for the number 25 BMW after Sebring. And if you look at how Daytona started for BMW, for them to get a 2 second place finishes in a row, I think came as a big surprise. And I think that was one of the IMSA races that stood out to me this year. Of course, let's not, beat around the bush here. All right. My favorite race of the year was the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It's not a surprise. It's going to be the least surprising thing that was said all this entire episode.
Maybe.
Being there in person for the first time, I've been watching that race. Well, I've been watching that race for a long time. The first time I properly remember watching that race, though, was 2011. It immediately shot up to my favorite race of all time. The 2011 24 Hours of Le Mans is still my favorite race of all time to this day. But it was a real return to competition in the top class at Le Mans this year. It was fantastic to see that unpredictability. Reliability played a little bit of a factor. We had unexpected cars crash out of the lead. We had, I think, every major manufacturer leading the race at some point or another. But it wasn't just the hypercar category. We had fantastic storylines in LMP2. GT Am Corvette won off a big comeback drive. They were I think they were 2 laps down at one point in the race earlier on.
Yep.
So listen, obviously that was going to be my favorite race, and I do want to talk a little bit about just attending the race in person, which my friends will yell at me for because I do this too much. But if you get the chance to go to the 24 Hours of Le Mans some year, do it, because it is beyond what I was expecting, and my expectations were pretty damn high. And just the atmosphere around the race, it has a real true festival feel that I feel like, for me personally, of the races I've gone to, has only been matched by probably the Indy 500. And just the atmosphere around the town or the city of Le Mans during scrutineering and practice. The practice sessions, the grandstands were full. And I was like, it is a Wednesday afternoon and the grandstands are full. And I'm standing up along the fence trying to get a spot to stand along the fence. And you had to stand a couple rows back because there were so many people there. And I know it was the 100th anniversary this year, but I think that we're going to see a similar story next year with the uptick, even further uptick in competition. So definitely make it a bucket list event. Make it out to the 24 Hours of Le Mans someday. And just even more than that, for me, the story of the year was somehow going to the Indy 500, walking around the Monaco Grand Prix circuit, and then driving around the Circuit de la Sarthe in 7 days. I'm going to remember that story until the end of time. Probably one of the coolest things I'll ever do in my life, if not the coolest thing I'll ever have the chance of doing. So that is the favorite race of the year, favorite event for both of us. Looks like we were on the same foot. Speaking of foot, nice segue. My favorite story of the race of the year, favorite story of the year, was Fabio Scherer winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans with Inter Europol and LMP2 despite racing with a fractured foot. This is one of the stories that sort of went, I don't want to say it was unnoticed, but some people might not know about it. In the first safety car period of the race on lap 3, Fabio Scherer's foot was run over by the GT Am Corvette. I believe Ben Keating was in the car at the time. And not only was he able to continue on, but he was able to continue on and put in a race-winning performance for that team despite the setback. I know he was in a lot of pain. He was in crutches after the race. But I think what that story highlighted to me was, I think a lot of times nowadays, endurance racing can feel a little bit sort of too perfected and too robotic in some ways. Whereas the cars have gotten more and more reliable and the drivers have gotten more and more skilled, it just seems like few things rarely ever go wrong. And you can't get much more wrong than having your foot run over on lap 3 of a 24-hour race. And for Fabio Scherer to continue on from that and be able to help his team win that race, I think is the endurance racing story of the year. Because endurance racing, as we learned from that race, is not only still about the car, it's still about the driver as well, and the driver being able to perform for that long and to perform under those circumstances. So for me, that was my favorite story of the 2023 season.
Yeah, that's a pretty darn good one. And when I was thinking of some overall stories, that was not honestly one that came to my mind. So I think I like that one. I think Ben Keating was talking about it a little bit or touched on it today with in the Only Endurance awards, and quite a pretty incredible story that Fabio was able to finish that race given the condition that he was in.
Yep.
For my sort of standout or favorite story from the season, I took a little bit of a farther back approach. I looked at the season overall as opposed to individual stories from within the race, and From the WEC, looking back at the season, I think the Iron Dames and the season that they had is they had a really great season. I think it kind of got overshadowed a little bit by the dominance of the Corvette. But if you consider, I think the pretty big step forward that Iron Dames took this past season, it was very noticeable, and they were they were in the conversation right from the beginning of pretty much every race this season, ultimately culminating with a win at the end of the season, which was amazing to see, and hopefully they'll be able to carry that momentum forward into the 2024 season. On the IMSA side of things, though, because I want to keep it, keep it even here. I do want to highlight AWA and the performance that they put forward this past season. A pretty small team, just dating back a few years, have worked their way up through IMSA support series along the way, and found their way in LMP3 in 2022 for the first season in the WeatherTech Championship. And they showed up to the Rolex this season, and they were the only LMP3 car that didn't encounter serious issues during that race. So with the number 17, they ended up picking up a win there. I also believe that they picked up a win at Indianapolis in class as well. I know they picked up a couple of wins over the course of the season, and had a really, really strong season. And they transitioned that into they are the IMSA Corvette customer team now for 2024. So I think it's a really interesting story, just how far they've come in the past few years. And of course, anytime you can land with a manufacturer like Corvette, then you're doing something right. So good to see them get rewarded for the big steps forward that they've taken the past couple of years. But there were a lot of really good stories, I think, in the sports car racing world this year. We could have talked about just the return, the 100th anniversary, the centenary Le Mans, the massive increase in the number of cars in the top class there. Garage 56. We didn't even talk about that.
We
That
didn't even
was an
touch on it.
incredible,
Yeah.
yeah, an incredible story. There's so, and then not even to mention there's other stories within races that were taking place that were incredible as well. And just a really good year overall for sports car racing. There was a lot of interesting storylines to talk about this season.
Definitely. Definitely. The next category we had was our favorite livery from the season. I had a bit of a think on this one because I wanted to come up with a favorite one from my side, and then also a couple of honorable mentions as well. I think there's a fan favorite that I'm sure is going to get brought up. So I'm gonna give you my takes first because I tried to be a little bit against the trend here. My favorite livery of the season was the Peugeot digital. I think it was called a digital camo livery that they ran starting at Le Mans this year, and they ran it for the rest of the season. If I'm not mistaken, they're switching back to the gray livery next season, which
Ooh,
I'm just a little upset about because
yeah.
the one thing that I loved about that livery is that it was a very refreshing take on a hypercar livery for a fully factory team amongst a sea of corporate liveries from every other manufacturer. I feel like not just in sports car racing, but in a lot, you can see the same thing in NASCAR if you want. I feel like liveries have gotten a lot more corporate than they used to be, and by association, that usually means I'm a lot more boring or a lot less diverse. There's been a bit of a meme recently with red, white, and black being the official colors of prototype racing of the LMP1 and now hypercar category in the WEC, and I'm glad we're finally starting to break that trend a little bit. Of course, with Toyota switching over to that all-black car, but for me, seeing that 9X8 in that completely bonkers livery, fantastic livery in person as well. and I was really glad to see them switch that up a little bit. And I kind of hope I really hope they switch with, they keep running that livery for next season, and they don't switch back to the generic corporate gray one that they had before. But we shall see. A couple honorable mentions. Of course, it's going to get brought up. The AO Racing GTD Rexy. I'm assuming that might be one of your favorites as well, so I'm going to let you take some of that one. But also the number 19. This is a bit of a left field one. The yellow number 19 Iron Lynx Lamborghini that only ran at the Rolex 24 this year. Don't really know what it is, but I'm a sucker for yellow race cars. Yellow race cars are what got me into sports car racing in the first place back in 2008 with the Penske Porsche RS Spider sponsored by DHL. I've always been a big fan of them. So seeing that car, especially seeing that car in person at the Rolex 24 this year, I was a big fan of it. And I don't feel like people gave it quite as much praise as it might have deserved, in my opinion.
And you liked the banana boat as well. You got a banana signed after all at the end of the day.
I did, yeah. But especially a yellow Lamborghini. I mean, there's something about the angularity of the Lamborghini, and you could say the same thing about the Corvette as well, but a yellow angular race car to me is pretty top tier.
Yeah, that is a good one. That I completely forgot about that one. That is that yellow Lambo. Yeah, it was just for the one race, and you remember seeing some of the media day sort of shots, and they had the Iron Dames, that yellow Lamborghini, and then the green one, the green one as well that ran the full endurance cup. That was yeah, those looked great side by side.
And I can only hope that someday down the road, if we get additional entries from Lamborghini in IMSA and the WEC, they do the same thing for prototypes, because I'd love to see a yellow prototype racing alongside the green one, or an Iron Dames pink Lamborghini racing against the green one. Yeah, I love the ambition from Lamborghini to switch it up a little bit.
Did you like the Cadillac liveries then?
Which one?
The Cadillac they had the yellow fronted one, the red, and the blue.
Yeah, I would say the yellow in particular is probably my favorite. But yeah, I do like how Cadillac switched it up as well. You're right. Doing the at Daytona this year and Le Mans, the three Cadillacs, the red, the yellow, and the blue. Yeah, if you're going to do a corporate livery and have a corporate baseline, you might as well change the colors a little bit to make it a little bit interesting. And I know that those are two different teams, but at the end of the day, they're still running the same base livery.
Yep. Yeah, those are some good ones for sure. And I think for me, I actually didn't pick one from the WEC. I forgot to. But I do really like the Peugeot, or I'm probably mispronouncing that, but I do really like that livery. You also got to give a shout out, I think, to Jota, and that gold Hertz livery was quite nice as well.
Yeah.
When it comes to my favorites, though, me again, I couldn't narrow it down, so I picked two. The first one we only actually saw for, like your yellow Lamborghini that you mentioned, we only saw it a couple times last year, and that's the AF Corsa LMP2. It was kind of a chrome. It stuck out on track. It was a chrome with black. I can't remember the sort of design that was on it, but you couldn't miss it on track. It looked great. It looked great flying around on track, and it also looked great standing still in the paddock. So I got to give them a big shout out. But my favorite livery was Triarsi Competizione. They ran, I don't think they ran the full season, but they ran the Endurance Cup races. They had this red chrome. Again, we're talking about red, black, and white race cars, but this one was just very nicely put together with sort of a red chrome, black, and white, and it complemented the Ferrari and the shape of that body really, really well. I really enjoyed seeing that car, and I thought it looked incredible this season, and and hopefully we'll be seeing something similar from them next season.
Yeah, and might I add as well, the 296. This was the first season Ferrari running the 296 GT3. I
Yep.
love that car. I think it's a phenomenal
Yeah.
looking GT3 car. And in my opinion, looks even better than the 488 did that ran before it. Big
Yeah.
fan of that car.
It's great. Actually, you mentioned it briefly. We can't talk about this without talking about AO Racing and Rexy/Roxy.
Yep.
I thought that was just too easy to pick.
Same. Yep.
So again, I mean, they took the season. I think at the end of the day, the fact that they're now known pretty much around the world, thanks to their their racing in IMSA and the WEC. They're known everywhere now for that livery, and they actually announced today that it's going to be sticking around in GTD Pro. So we're going to get another season of Rexy.
Yep. Yeah. Looking forward to seeing that. We got a comment saying my favorite livery of the year was the WTM by Rinaldi LMP3 in the European Le Mans series. And I'll admit I had to do a quick Google search to find that car, and I found the one from the 2021 season. So I don't know if it's still the same, but I will. Yeah, it's a pretty good looking livery. Pretty I would say out there. At least they put a lot of design elements in that livery, than just a plain color scheme. So yeah, good pick there.
I do like the look of the LMP3 cars as well. I think you can do a
I
lot of things to make that look good.
Yeah, I'm a bit mixed.
There.
But yeah, some teams like to have some fun with it. Some teams can do some livery trickery to make that car a little bit more interesting. The next category. Do you want to start this one out? I've
Yeah,
been taking
sure.
the first one for a while here.
Sure, I can do this one. And our next category is standout performance. We don't have any nice paragraph to go along with what that really entails. And per usual, I've picked many standout performances. You could probably do a vote on these. But again, I wanted to get a nice mix of the WEC as well as IMSA involved in this. So I picked a prototype and a GT from IMSA. The prototype performance that I picked that was standout was Porsche Penske Motorsports at Road America. They were the clear class of the field at Road America. They dominated the entire race. If I'm not I think they may have led all of the laps in that race between their two cars. If not, it was close to all of them. There was never really a question of if they were going to win that race. I know Meyershank Racing and Tom Blomqvist made a good run at them at the end, but I think at that point, Penske, they were just trying to conserve their stuff a little bit and make sure that they were getting to the end. They dominant at Road America. They also had kind of a similar performance at Indy, where they were really strong. But I think that's certainly a standout performance on the GTP side of things for me. On the GT side of things in IMSA, Paul Miller Racing, they had countless standout performances, I think, this past season. They won a record 5 races, I believe is what the final tally was in that class this season. Absolutely dominating from them, and I think they deserve a big shout out here. Moving over to the WEC, we've talked about these moments a little bit already. Iron Dames at Bahrain, they just the performance that they put forward there was pretty incredible. Great to see them win the last race of the GTE era, and then Ferrari at Le Mans. It's I think that's kind of an easy kind of a cop out answer to mention them, but obviously any time that you can roll into Le Mans in your first year with a program and put forward a performance, not just making it to the finish line, but beating Toyota to the finish line, is that was a very strong performance by them. Hopefully I didn't take all of the moments or all of the standout performances. There were many this season, so I think there's plenty of meat left on the bone for you.
Yeah, no, believe it or not, I had no overlap at all. So that's good.
Perfect.
I took a bit of a different approach to this, though. I was looking
Oh,
at specific drivers for stand-up performances for the most part, but I also
oh,
added another one while I was sitting here because I thought of one while you were mentioning IMSA that I just had to throw on there. So I'll start with my honorable mentions. First one being Dorian Pan at Petit Le Mans. First time for her racing at Road Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. I think certainly she was in the French junior ranks for pretty much every season until this one, when she jumped up to. Actually, she was in the ELMS last year as well. Qualified second in class though, and third in the GT overall classification in pretty damp conditions. And she got to the overall lead in the first stint of the race and started pulling a gap on. If I said overall lead, I meant GT overall, of course. Started pulling a gap on the field before the first safety car came out. And as I was sitting there in turn 10B at Road Atlanta, just looking at the gap she was starting to pull, I was like, she really hasn't raced here ever before. And
yep.
this is a car that she doesn't really race that often. She was only racing the Lamborghini in the IMSA endurance races this season. Yeah, uber impressed by that performance, and I've mentioned that a couple times in this podcast before. Another one that stood out was Kevin Estre at Fuji, getting the lead pretty early on for that Porsche Penske Motorsports 963 after the Turn 1 calamity, and held on to that lead for a long time, and really was the first driver I saw outside of Le Mans that was able to stick it to Toyota. And I think Kevin Estre in particular was a standout driver of the day for that car. A team that I think had a really standout performance this season, not really any race in particular, is the 74 Riley Motorsports LMP3 team. Absolutely dominated the LMP3 class all season. They won all but 2 races, I want to say. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But complete dominant performance from that team this season. And another one that I had forgotten about until you started mentioning IMSA that I wanted to give a shout out to.
Yep.
But the one performance that I wanted to give above all others, and this might be a little bit controversial, was Tom Blomqvist at the Rolex 24 this year. Legal or not, whether or not the
Oh
car was
boy.
legal, every single time he got in the car in that race this year, I knew that he was either going to catch the cars in front or he was going to build a gap on the cars behind, or both. And in my opinion, if you had to name one driver to be the MVP of the Rolex 24 this year, I think it was Tom Blomqvist. Um, like I said, it's controversial because of everything that happened after the race with the investigation on that car and that car being deemed illegal. But I don't think that detracts from the performance that Tom as a driver individually put in with that car. And like I said, I knew that he was quick before that race, but sitting in the stands of that race, it reaffirmed it even more that he's one of the top prototype drivers in the world right now. And I'm really glad that we're going to see him racing for Action Express in the Michelin Endurance Cup for next season.
Yeah, I think that's a really good choice there. I think anybody that wants to put forward the deflate gate point for Tom, you just need to look at the races after the Rolex. It's not like his performance went down the tubes after that. We mentioned it just a moment ago. He was really the only driver I would say that had anything for Porsche at Road America. Put forth a really, really strong drive at CTMP. Meyershank Racing picked up, of course, the win there. He was a large part of that. And then, of course, Meyershank Racing picked up the win in the final race of the season at Petit Le Mans. So Tom Blomqvist, of course, a big part of all of those drives, even if you want to ignore everything that happened at the Rolex. And thankfully, we're going to see him maintain a presence in IMSA next year because he's a real treat to see on track.
Definitely. And also performances in the LMP2 class in the WEC as well to
Yep.
add on to that. Um, Final category that we had was the driver of the year. One driver that really stood out amongst all the others. Um, I didn't end up doing any honorable mentions for this one, to be honest. I was running a bit short on time. So I only picked one, but I'll tell you what, I think it's a deserving one. Nikki Katzberg led Corvette Racing to a world championship, their first world championship in the FIA WEC this year, alongside his co-drivers Ben Keating and Nico Varon, alongside a Le Mans winning class this year. The team won. The team completely dominated the season, first of all. They finished either first or second at 6 of the 7 races this season, with the only outlier being the season finale at Bahrain. Complete standout performance from Corvette Racing as a team this year, but I think also from Nicky Katzberg as a driver. Unfortunately, we didn't see any performances from him on the IMSA side this year, but another big standout for him this year was the Nürburgring 24, which I think, personally, is probably the hardest race, the most difficult circuit race in the world. You can mention the Isle of Man TT or certain rally events that might be more difficult, but I think as a closed circuit event goes, the Nürburgring 24 is probably the most difficult race in the world that still exists. And he actually won that race overall this year for Fricadelli Racing in their Ferrari 296 GT3. I think when he won that race, that was really what set in stone for me that he's one of the top GT drivers right now, and I don't think he could have asked for much more this season in both the WEC and the Nürburgring 24. Hopefully, maybe we get to see him in some one-off IMSA events next year as well.
Yeah, you actually, I really like the point that you raised there about the Nürburgring 24. Because, and this ties back to actually a bit of some recent sports car racing news when Ford announced their remaining factory drivers, and there was a couple of drivers that I hadn't really heard of that are going to be competing in IMSA next year. Christopher Mies and Frederick Versailles.
Oh, Fred Vervish.
Vervish.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, that's how the commentators say it, so that's how I'm going to say it.
I'm gonna roll with that then. Frederick Vervish, and I've heard their names before, but I was looking at what they accomplished, and they're both 2-time Nürburgring 24 winners. And then all of a sudden, at that moment, it clicks. It's that's Ford. Obviously, anybody's going to really value some strong Nürburgring performances, and yeah, definitely very worthy of getting those rides. So I like that you called out the Nürburgring 2024 victory there, because that is very arguably the most difficult and most challenging sports car race on the planet. So it definitely takes a lot to win that. I have, of course, the trend continues. I have multiple drivers that I want to shout out here for various different reasons. One that I hadn't initially put down, but we were talking about her earlier, Dorian Penn. Incredible in anything that she raced this year. Definitely worthy of sort of driver of the year consideration. If not driver of the year, it was just so impressive what she was able to accomplish this season. The two that I had put down, the first one is another, I guess you could call it Dorian Penn. She raced in some LMP2 this year, correct?
Yeah, full season for Prema.
Okay, so she was part prototype driver, part GT driver. Jack Aiken largely raced in the prototype ranks this season, and I am putting him forth for driver of the year consideration. Coming into this season, I mean, we knew of Jack Aitken, definitely a name in the racing world, a young driver, of course, a little bit of F1 experience under his belt. So F1 is a feeder series at the end of the day.
Yep.
But he really was just so impressive in the Action Express Racing number 31 this season when he was in that car. You look at the data at the end of races, and he was consistently up there among the top handful of drivers in just consistent lap times, fast lap times, and very, very well deserved that he gets a full season ride with the 31 team next year. I think that's going to be a very, very strong lineup. And then the final driver, he took place both in the WEC and in IMSA. You mentioned him in passing when you were talking about Nicky Katzberg and Nico Verone. Just such an impressive season. You win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. You win the WEC Championship. You add in the Rolex 24. He won at Indy. I think he was part of the line. No, he might have not been the lineup that won at Indy. I could be wrong there, but he also might have. I can't remember. Regardless, even if he wasn't in the car for that event at Indy, such an impressive season. And the guy is so young. I think he's 23 years old. This, of course, I think he's locked up now as a Corvette factory driver, rightfully so. We are going to be talking about him for many years to come. I think there's a long and successful career ahead of Nico.
Yep. I bumped into him in an iRacing event once, and it didn't go too well for me.
Yeah. That would not be somebody I want to come across.
He's quick, yeah. I'll tell you that. Yeah, I think you got some good picks there. I think the one that stood out to me was Jack Aiken, because I think some people might point at his unfortunate mistake at the start of Le Mans this year, exiting the first chicane where the track was just slick. He was offline, got on throttle a little too much too early, and spun it into the wall, and they had to make a miraculous recovery for that, or repair to that car to get it back out on track, and it really put them on the back burner all race. But for him to rebound from that, and I think that that's a very challenging thing on a driver, to make a mistake like that at probably the team's biggest race of the year. For him to rebound from that, I think just speaks to the quality of him as a driver. So initially when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, but the Le Mans crash though. But then I thought to myself, the way he was able to rebound from that, I think sets him in the deserving category there. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he's able to do next season, like you said.
Yeah, I definitely had the hesitation there when I thought, oh yeah, who was in the car at Le Mans for that? And I was like, oh, it was Jack. But yeah, I think everything else, at the end of the day, his season, I don't think it's not going to be defined by that moment. His season's going to be defined by he was the finisher of the race at Sebring, and before the big accident took place, he was very, very quick, and just throughout the entire season, every time he was on track, the 31 was fast whenever he was on track in that car. And yeah, an impressive season, even considering the accident that took place. And again, a young driver, like you mentioned, his ability to rebound throughout the rest of the season was certainly impressive.
Yep. All right. I think that's an episode. We're only an hour and a half in, so somehow, despite everything, we've managed to bring it back to our typical hour and a half cookie cutter podcast. But I do want to end out this podcast in the season, because I know this episode has been pretty tough to get out, and it took us a month. But I do appreciate everybody who's been tuning into these episodes. More things to come for next year. And I'm really looking forward to continuing this podcast. I'm really glad we got it back off the ground in, September of this year, October. So it was early September, actually.
Yeah.
And looking forward to continuing into the next season, because we have plenty to talk about. Like I said earlier on, we're about 4 weeks away from the Roar Before the 24, and 5 weeks away from the IMSA season kicking off the ground again with the Rolex 24 at Daytona. And provided nothing unexpected happens, the two of us will both be there.
Yep.
And looking forward to having another fantastic season of IMSA and the FIA WEC to discuss. So that closes it out for the 2023 season. Stu, do you have any last words before we wrap this one up?
No, I think I would love to hear from some of the listeners. I know there's plenty of people that aren't able to catch this live and will be
Yeah.
listening to this afterwards. I'd love to hear what you thought of some of our choices for these awards, as well as who you thought or teams that you thought were worthy of some of them. I think, I feel like a broken record saying this. There were so many story points and so many impressive performances from this past season, and we probably didn't even touch on 90% of them. There were so many performances that we've probably missed. Maybe there were races that we didn't see from other championships that had incredible moments that we missed as well. So let us know on Twitter or X or whatever
Or
your
Instagram or whatever, YouTube.
whatever you use. Let us
Next
know
episode.
what you thought. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I'll echo that. I'd love to hear what some of your opinions are if you weren't able to catch the episode live. But for now, I think that's enough to wrap this one up. We should be back. Hopefully, all our bad luck's out of the way, and we should be back in 2 weeks, which is after the new year, which will be January 2nd,
Yes.
back on the traditional Tuesday time slot, if nothing goes poorly. So I want to wrap this one up. I do want to say to everybody who is listening, hope you have a very happy Christmas, happy holidays, and a happy new year, as we will catch you in 2024, because we have a lot more to discuss, and I'm really excited for it. Thank you all so much for listening to this one. Catch you in the next one. Take care.